The IRGC is considering prolonging the war to further damage the United States. Let's find out more. Like and subscribe.
All right, so I want to start with something that's coming out of Iran. Today, a lot of news is coming out of Iran that, the worry that I have that Iran may be more keen to continue the war than the US is starting to unravel. We've got the PBS did an interview with the commander, IRGC commander, his name is Nakati. PBS journalist asked him, is it Iran's objective to drag out this war to maybe wait until Trump is out of office? The commander says, look, we have to attain deterrence so that the enemy never dares to attack us. So we can.
That is what I have been saying. Compared to what Morio's been saying, that Iran should give Trump an off-ramp, I'm saying that's insane. If Iran gives Trump an off-ramp, then in 6 months, Trump is going to attack Iran again. It's what they've done so far. The 12-day war last year, and then 6 months later, they attack Iran again. As long as there's no other cost to Trump, he's going to keep attacking Iran again and again and again. Partly because apparently Israel has convinced Trump that Iran is trying to go after his life, and so he thinks if he can take Iran out, his life can be saved now. It's so stupid. Anyway, what Iran is doing now, and it's the correct strategy, is to impose a cost. Oil shortage in the world. Visible economic impact on the entire world. And at that point, when Trump is squealing, get him to sign the MOU and abide by the MOU. Decimate Republicans in the midterms. I hate it. I don't want Republicans to lose in the midterms, but if I'm Iran, that's what I want, so that Trump never thinks about attacking Iran again.
Can live with security. One way is to prolong this war until we get to the next term of the presidency and cause attrition so that if anyone else wants to attack Iran, they will know there is a cost. So that is a serious discussion being had in Iran right now. And literally, as we're going live, there's a report that came out on Bloomberg. Iran, this is from Bloomberg, summary of the article. Iran is adopting a more aggressive military posture toward the US as diplomatic talks between Tehran and Washington remain frozen. The shift comes amid heightened regional tensions and continued uncertainty over whether negotiations between the two sides will resume. Iran's tougher stance further complicates efforts to revive diplomacy and reduce tensions with Washington. So we've talked a few times about the worry. It's a worry that mainly I have is that Iran not only wants to cause the US pain to build deterrence, they think they may be able to get more out of the US if they keep this war going and putting the US in a more difficult position. Because remember, this war going on.
Of course they will. When there's an actual shortage, when the countries around the world are screaming at Trump, get the Strait unlocked. When the Republicans in Congress are screaming at Trump, get oil prices down, get gas prices down. Yeah. When Trump is under all that pressure, Iran's negotiating position will be much stronger. They will be able to get more concessions. And considering how close they are to that point, I've said it for a long time. If Iran holds Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months, they win. 6 months is the end of August, beginning of September. They're nearly there. Why would they open the straits now?
For the last few weeks, thanks to Trump, for him breaching the MOU. Trump doing what Trump does gave Iran the upper hand, gave Iran those advantages and that leverage. So in Iran's minds, the calculation.
On that note, let me just show. This is the Strait of Hormuz, daily crossings. Up-to-date one from August 12th. Look at all that missing oil. It's all coming out of global reserves in the United States and other places, and all those reserves are running out. And all those reserves are going to need to be replenished eventually, once oil flows again. So oil is not going to be low for any time in the foreseeable future. I expect it to be well above 80 or 90 for at least another year, because of all these factors. On that note, here is what's going on in actual products people use, like gasoline. Look at that. Oil might not have gone up to new high, but gasoline certainly has. Look at that, this crack spread, or Asia, way up there. It's diesel is where you're going to see the shortage happen first. It's you see right there, or red diesel. That's where you're going to see the shortage happen first. It's already gone up to a whole new level since the start of the war. And this is U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve levels. And it's gone under 300 million. By the way, there are limits to how low this can be drawn. And if it goes below those limits, it starts destroying the reserves. That means the salt caverns. The way they get the oil out is by pumping water down that forces the oil to float up higher, and then they can collect it. But salt dissolves in water. So if they pump too much water down into those salt caverns, they'll collapse. We're approaching that point, as well as limits to how much can be drawn down set by Congress. And $100 oil isn't exactly justification to draw down past those limits and destroy the petroleum reserves, United States petroleum reserves. So, yeah, we're coming to crunch time in oil.
Will be like, look, if we can sustain this for longer, let's do another 6 months of this. Imagine what we could get then. Look how what we're getting now versus what we were getting during the MOU. Now we have all these demands just for the Strait of Hormuz to open, unfreezing of assets, ceasing all hostilities, including in Palestine. These are things that were not demands for the Strait of Hormuz to open. Now they are. Reparations for ships that go through, countries' ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz, they have to pay reparations if they participated in the war. All these new demands. If they wait that's in what, 2 months? If they wait 6 months, Washington becomes the capital of Iran in their mind, but they can get a lot more concessions.
I think
they will get more concessions so long as this goes on. Trump was an idiot to walk away from the MOU. Yes, it was a surrender document to Iran, but the surrender document he will eventually be forced to sign might be worse than the MOU.
That's absolutely the plan. And actually, I don't know if I would say they want to continue the war as in like maybe escalating, but they're happy to keep things at this tempo. They're happy to keep things as they are now for the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. The Trump administration is in wait-and-see mode. Wait-and-see mode. So funny. They're hoping that sanctions combined with a blockade are going to cripple Iran. Thing is, look at this. Iran got a whole bunch of oil out. At the start of the war, it sold a whole bunch of oil. Then it sold a whole bunch of more oil during the MOU. So it's not starved oil. Meanwhile, the oil missing from the global economy, that's just a huge big chunk that hasn't been replaced. What I'm saying is the global economy will give out before Iran gives out. So the wait and see approach, that's what Iran wants too.
Maybe even 18 months. And yeah, it's probably because they want to get better concessions, but I also think there's a revenge play here. I think they know they can really F up Trump's presidency. They can really damage the United States in the long run. And, I just talked to Michael.
And that's how you establish deterrence. You make it so painful when the enemy attacks you that they never attack you again, because they just think about attacking you. They remember that pain and they say, oh, no way I'm going through that again. That's what Iran's doing now. It's establishing deterrence. And I've said before, that oil shock hits, no one will be attacking Iran again.
Oh boy, I'm forgetting his last name.
Oliver, I think.
Oliver, yes. We talked a lot. He's an interesting guy. Talking about just the facts. I mean, this guy was really interesting, but the way he framed it is basically he didn't come out and say it, but he said that anybody who's sitting on a lot of things like gold right now, as the economic order permanently shifts, and he thinks, like Pilkington does, that Jamie Dimon was being too soft, that actually the world reserve currency could be gone within the next 2.5 years. He agreed.
My timeline is 5 years, but I wouldn't be surprised. I expect inflation to spiral out of control over the next 5 years.
Agreed with Pilkington on that.
Michael Oliver said that.
Yes, he said that he thinks it's looking at all. He said the background data. He said, you got to look at the back. And he walked the audience. It's really interesting. We did about 35 minutes. It was really intense. And he said that, for instance, China's sitting on a lot of gold, physical gold. He said he didn't want to come out and say, yeah, it's going to be China's next economic order. But he said, look, he goes,
the pattern is unmistakable. After World War II, United States earned, I think, 3/4 of the world's gold, all the gold in the world, 3/4 of it owned by the United States, in the United States. Manufacturing, 2/3 of the world's goods made in the United States. Of the entire world's goods, manufactured stuff in the United States. China is now that position. Manufacturing king of the world, tons and tons of gold. It's going to be China dominant player in the world for the next 50 years. Because we outsourced our manufacturing sector there. Because we have our traitorous elites in the United States.
Anybody, any country sitting on a lot of gold, a lot of silver, when this thing shakes out, he said they're going to be in the dominant position. He goes, and unfortunately, America is not in a dominant position in that world. Not.
By the way, I read your article about '08. Really good. Thank you. I really wish my website hadn't gone down. I didn't update my credit card information at the ISP, and I didn't get to see the email about it, and so it just went poof. You can only find it out on the Wayback Machine. So annoying, but oh well. At least you can still find it on the Wayback Machine. I'm just so mad you can't search it, because it makes it harder for me to find articles I want.
Not right now, because they're listening to all the people who are saying, commodity, yeah, it's all stock market's what matters. So I think the Iranians also are assessing something similar, and they might be thinking this is a chance not only to get revenge.
Do I do day trading? Well, I sleep during the day. That makes it very hard to do day trading, honestly. No, and the market is manipulated. I've known that. So day trading, I think unless you are the person that's connected to U.S. Treasury and know which way the market's going to be manipulated, you're going to get screwed over unless you do momentum trading and you're very careful. I wouldn't do it. I do medium-term, long-term bets because that's guaranteed. Like I bought gold back in, huge amount of gold back in 2021, 2022. It went up a lot. That's how you make it. They can't manipulate it over the long term. So that's what I would do. Yep.
Against Trump in particular for killing all their leaders. But this is a chance to deal a severe, possibly existential blow to the U.S.-led order forever. And I think that there are other parties behind Iran, like China and Russia, kind of egging them on some level, saying, yeah, okay, go ahead, because it's going to help us too in the long run. So, I think that this is, I would frame it differently. I don't know if like they want to see a return to the missiles, everybody,
No,
but definitely this tempo, yeah, they can deal with this, and they can deal with it a lot longer than Trump and the
or even missiles. I know I'm generally the optimistic one when it comes to this particular war, but even with the missiles, think of it this.
Yeah, on missiles and economically, both of them, Iran can outlast the United States, and they know it. They know all the economic data that's going through alternative media channels, not mainstream. Of course, they don't share the truth there. But like on Mario's show, they know everything that's on Mario's show. Probably some of them watch it. And they know that the United States can't last as long as they can. Break the hegemony. Yes. The one thing that's frustrating to me, honestly, is that all these alternative media guys, they're much closer to the truth than the mainstream media, but they're still missing some key aspects, like puts on treasuries. What's so annoying about this is that it's on the Fed's website, what I'm about to show you. On the Federal Reserve website, they released one transcript. They released this in 2008, middle of 2008, when the Fed was very distracted. In this way, long-term yields could be influenced. We could sell put options on long-term treasury securities at strike prices associated with long-term yields. That means you have the Federal Reserve going out secretly, because no one knows it. No one in alternative media is talking about, no one in mainstream is talking about, so it's secret. They secretly go out and sell put options on treasuries to lower the borrowing costs of the United States, to lower the interest rates on long-term treasuries. This is very risky. It's dishonest. Also, it makes long-term treasuries seem safer than they actually are, because if you can buy real cheap insurance about treasuries going down, it makes them seem safe, right? If you can get insurance cheaply, then there's no risk. And yeah, this is another thing. Auctioning derivatives is something we already have experience doing. In the event the options were exercised, the impact on our portfolio would be profound. So what you had happen when this war began, Iran war, and oil surged, is I am absolutely certain that the U.S. Treasury was currently had lots of puts outstanding that they had to make good on. And what happens if oil prices go up to 150? Interest rates on treasuries, long-term treasuries surge, and you have catastrophic losses at the New York Fed, the Treasury. They're one and the same, the Treasury and the Fed. And so that's why they put a cap on the price of oil. But right around here, on July 1st, someone went out and started buying a lot of the puts. That means, how do you get yourself out of this derivative position you've gotten yourself into? That means you've sold a lot of protection. Just say if interest rates, I need a chart of interest rates. This is long-term treasury yields. Let's look at the recent times. Right here, June 29th. The yields on treasury start soaring. What's happening right there? And this is right when oil hits the bottom. After oil plunge, you would think that'd be good for treasuries, oil plunging. It should be good for treasuries. Yet, surprisingly, you have the yields on treasuries rising. And the reason for that, treasury options surge risk, igniting bigger market turbulence. You see, what is driving the yields up in treasuries is that put options are suddenly become very expensive. So what the Treasury did is they were stuck in this huge short position, basically, on treasuries. And so they controlled the price of oil, with the memorandum of understanding and the narrative of an oil glut, making people think that oil is going down to 60 and staying there forever. At that time, they start buying back their derivatives to avoid the loss. And that's why what's driving the yields up is the Fed, Treasury, Fed, whoever, buying back the put options on U.S. Treasuries. Yeah, the more options sold, better. A large volume of options sold could reduce the risk premium embedded in long-term rates. The more sold, the more effective. What's frustrating is this is right there on the Federal Reserve website. They openly state that they intend to sell put options on Treasury securities, and yet no one is talking about it. None of the videos ever address that. So by the time it comes out, it'll be like was Pizzagate, where the story first breaks and it's like years later before the truth comes out. But it will come out. The playing around with derivatives is eventually going to blow up in the Fed's face.
On that front as well, what happens to the American interceptors? They're already out. There's article after article about how the interceptors are low and Trump's options are very limited. There's another other article I was reading today analyzing how the difficult position Trump is in. I remember what the article said. Oh, there it is. I found it. Trump is shifting towards a wait-and-see strategy on Iran, according to The Atlantic, relying increasingly on economic sanctions and the U.S. naval blockade to pressure Iran into negotiations after military threats and strikes failed to bring the war to an end. Scott Bessent had argued that tightening sanctions could eventually force Iran to concede, while depleted U.S. missile defense stockpiles have further limited Trump's military options. So this analysis by The Atlantic, which is pretty accurate, actually across the board, it's accurate. Like, maybe
who's the writer on that one?
Could work. I don't know. I just have a summary of it.
Okay.
But the article if the analysis says the U.S. would benefit by testing, I'm not saying it will work, by testing an economic blockade and sanctions on Iran to potentially force them to concede. But they don't have military options because of the low interceptors. Isn't that, if you flip that, isn't that Iran's position then? Iran's like, okay, our economy is in a difficult position. I saw today a report that according to Mehr News, Iran is going to be selling petrol at 87,200 tomans per liter. So they're going to increase the price of fuel, price of gas in Iran. And that's something that doesn't usually happen. That's because of the economic difficulty. The price is a major increase in a country where petrol has traditionally been extremely cheap because the government heavily subsidizes fuel. For context, the new rate is 74% higher than Iran's previous top official petrol price of 50,000 tomans per liter. So you've got the Iranian economy, and this is one of many indicators going through a tough time. So the Iranians would be looking at this calculus and saying, hey, economically, this is our weak spot.
Well, they're having inflation. So eventually they need to adjust the rate of fuel up. It just makes sense.
Potentially, because the global economy is not in a great place either. But if we maintain the status quo right now, maybe the price of oil is still, it's not good, but it's well below $100 still, about $90, whatever it is. So the price of oil is not skyrocketing. I don't know if ships are going through the Omani side, there's pipelines, etc. But on the military front, we have the upper hand. They don't have enough interceptors. We have more than enough missiles and drones. The same commander in that same interview, he said, we produce ballistic missiles at a rate exceeding the rate at which they are fired. In the field of drones as well, our production capacity is far greater than the rate at which they are deployed. Even if this war lasts for several years, our ballistic missiles will continue to rain down on the enemy. So if this is the calculation in their mind, and these are the facts, then for them, it's better to continue the warfare that we saw earlier. So having the bombs drop my position before, because for them, they'll have bombs drop unless it gets into where the calculus changes for the Iranians. If the Americans and the Israelis begin decapitation strikes again, not saying it will work, but when those commanders know that their life is at risk, then they might change their.
Well, there's 2 points here, and I think that's a good valid thing you're saying. Let's look at beyond just the interceptors. Okay, what's a story that I've been tracking for the last 48 hours? They've got me writing about this at 1945, which is the suicides on the Abraham Lincoln, or the attempted suicides.
Crazy.
You've got the breakdown. And by the way, the Abraham Lincoln is not the only ship involved in this war for the U.S. side that is having issues. There are plenty of other ships, and I know you've had Larry on, and I've talked to people in the Navy whose kids are on one of these Marine ships. It's not good over there either. These amphibious landers, they're having issues with food. They're having issues. It's a disaster.
The suicide rates are skyrocketing on, especially that aircraft carrier. And Larry Johnson, in another interview, mentioned it. It's 3 times. It's the aircraft carrier we have in the Gulf has been out at sea 3 times longer than the longest deployment during World War II. There's no internet for the soldiers on that ship. No mail. They're just completely isolated, and it's terrible.
And these guys
tell us the story. Tell us the story for anyone that hasn't read the story on The Guardian. What is it?
Well, I'll talk about the Abraham Lincoln, which is basically they've been deployed for so long. Remember, they left, I think, November 25th of last year. They left San Diego.
250 days.
Yeah, 250 days, 40 days of combat, back-to-back combat. But they went out to the Pacific on a normal routine patrol. Then they were deployed immediately from there without stopping back home or anything. They went back to the Middle East in January. February 28th, the war erupts. They're in the middle of the thing. They're a key player in this war. Those guys and gals on the ship, though, have been deployed, as you said, for almost 300 days. Now, we were talking about the Gerald R. Ford before and how they were deployed for a record number. The Abraham Lincoln's right behind them. And a lot of the people on the ship, because there have been systemic logistical issues, lacking proper vegetables, for instance. They've had to stop at Oman last month. They had a long stopover because they couldn't get proper nutrient food out to the ship because it was a wartime environment. I mean, this is really bad. You got to keep these guys. These are bigger guys, right? These are war fighters in some cases with those Marines. You got to keep these guys well stocked. They had issues with sanitary conditions on board, water issues related to that. And people cooped up for 250 days.
Oh, it would be terrible to be stuck on a ship that long. 5,000 men on this ship for nearly a year, or over half a year.
Basically, I think there was about 6 or 7, attempted suicides that the Guardian counted. Maybe it was more. There are reports of the duty officers at night stopping multiple people from jumping overboard.
That's crazy.
I mean, this is not a healthy force. So it is. It's absolutely insane. And that's not even to talk about some of these other ships, destroyers and whatnot, who are having technical and mechanical failure. Remember, the Gerald R. Ford had to be pulled because supposedly of a laundry fire. Technical and mechanical issues, shall we say. So this is, and I said this to you a while ago, and you and I got back and forth about this. The U.S. Navy is the weakest it has been since the interwar years. And so for Trump to be put...
Yeah, I've said it too. We have a legacy military. That means we had a very strong military. It's just been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
Pinning all of his hopes on this naval blockade. Yeah, it's there on paper, but it ain't there in reality. It's not doing well. And by the way, Cal, the acting Secretary of the Navy, he did a town hall with the families of the Abraham Lincoln.
Trump started this war because he believed, the propaganda of mainstream media, that our military is just as strong as it was 20, 30 years ago. It's not, and that's why he's run into all these problems.
In San Diego.
That and drones.
And basically, the families are fit to be caught. And in fact, interestingly, one of the wives, her husband, that supposedly attempted to commit suicide recently on the ship, this wasn't some new recruit. This guy was a 15 or 14-year Navy veteran, multiple deployments. He just couldn't take it anymore. So what the hell is going on that ship that these veterans are now like, I can't take this anymore? But anyway, Cal is out there, and he took a lot of flack from the families, rightly so. And his solution was to tell them, don't worry, we're going to relieve your family soon. They're going to come home because the Theodore Roosevelt carrier group is going to be deployed. Now, after the fact, people said, that's great. Well, when will that happen? Cal never said. And now the Navy's saying that, yes, we plan on eventually deploying the Teddy Roosevelt and its group to replace the Abraham Lincoln, but we're not giving any date. So as far as anybody on the Abraham Lincoln is concerned, they're out in the war zone indefinitely, and it ain't going very well.
That's terrible.
This is not your father's, and certainly not my grandfather's Navy.
Do you know how long it will take for the Roosevelt to go there?
I have no idea. You're not going to get a straight answer out of anybody in the Navy. I suspect the reason they're not giving a date is because they don't know. Because remember, there is a shipyard crisis in the United States. There's this crisis where they don't have enough workers. They don't have enough slips to actually physically maintain these ships in a reliable way. If you'll remember, we talked before about the Gerald R. Ford. My understanding is until about a couple weeks ago, it was sitting in a line outside of Norfolk waiting for a maintenance area to open up for them.
We used to be the manufacturing capital of the world. What China is, these ships would just go in for maintenance, get turned right back out. There was no waiting line. Multiple shipyards where this could happen. Oh my, has stuff changed.
And they're only just now starting to repair. I mean, the infrastructure in this country for maintaining the world's supposedly most powerful navy is a joke. It is a shambles. And the real issue is not even physical shipyard space, naval shipyard space, which is bad enough. The issue is the workforce. We don't have a big enough workforce. There is an absolute naval workforce shortage and crisis that has been going on since the mid-90s. It's gotten worse every decade. And now we're at a critical point. And so, all these guys talking about how we're going to do this blockade, it's going to be great. Yeah, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we could have done a blockade, no problem. You've had Malcolm on. He was part of the tanker war in the 80s. I mean, that was a no-brainer back then. Not today. So Trump saying we're going to do this waiting game, I think he's playing into Iran's hands. Not that I'm saying he should escalate, but I actually think
I think Iran is totally happy with the waiting game. That's been their strategy all along. Hold Strait of Hormuz closed and wait. And it's their winning strategy.
he's playing into Iran's hands. And I wonder...
What can you?
Yeah,
go ahead. No, wonder what?
I was just going to say, I wonder if that then gets us back to the Israeli preference of decapitation strikes, because clearly Trump doesn't want to be seen as losing. He doesn't want to be seen as giving up.
Yep, that's why we're exactly where we are. About 2 months into this war, I think I figured out, okay, yeah, Trump isn't ready to surrender to Iran. It's too costly for him politically. And Iran has no incentive to surrender to the United States because it's winning. So the only way this can end is when the actual oil shortage happens and Trump's hand is forced. And he will surrender then.
He may want out, but he doesn't want to have egg on his face. And the Iranians are not going to let him out.
There's no good option for him at all. Like,
No.
Because I can criticize Trump on pretty much every decision he can.
I said this day one of the war. No way out. If I was Trump, I couldn't solve it. After you bomb supreme leader, you're just fucked if you're U.S. president at that point.
Take now. But I don't have an alternative. If I go to him right now, even the alternative of just walking away, I don't think we understand the consequences that will have on the U.S. Maybe it's the best option. Maybe not. I have no idea.
No,
It is the best option, but it's political suicide for Trump. It means if he signs the MOU and lives up to the MOU, walks away and leaves Iran in control, he's politically finished. And right now, for 5 months of the war, 5.5 months of the war, he has been pretending to his base, the ones who still support this war and him, that we've won, that we accomplished everything we wanted to. We are big winners, that this war was a good thing. He just then completely surrenders to Iran. All that narrative goes up in smoke. You think the public support for this war is bad now? You wait till that happens.
Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know whether we don't know.
I mean, our asses are going to get burned no matter what. We're going to get burned.
No, we don't know. Maybe economic sanctions or economic pressure on the Iranian economy may work.
Yes, we have.
And they've
Yeah,
been able
the
to
economies endure, survive, but the economy is in shambles. The economy is
Yeah, but again,
the of what it was back under the Shah.
there's no. I'm not defending there's no doubt the Islamic Republic is not great for the economy of Iran. But
There's two superpowers determined to prop Iran up, so it's not going to go under. May suffer economically, but it's not going to go under as long as China and Russia are making sure it isn't.
that's never been their claim to legitimacy. The Iranian,
And it's but the economy is. Look. Let's not forget, you're talking about, yes, we're China for 47 years. In January, people were talking about the regime collapsing without any U.S. intervention. That's how bad it got for them. So,
Yeah, but that was as a result of a currency collapse that the U.S. Treasury Secretary Bennett organized. It was a multi-month campaign to crash the Iranian rial. And then Mossad armed protesters, and it wasn't really a grassroots protest. Well, a lot of people protesting were grassroots, but the reason they were protesting, the currency collapse, that wasn't a result of Iranian actions. It was a foreign attack.
they've also hurted
the bazaar was a. Yes, I don't know. I don't know if the protests have. I know U.S. involvement has.
That's what. Yeah.
Yeah, the war has. Yeah, but just remember, the bazaars were on the streets, and the bazaars are the ones that brought down the Shah. When the bazaars start to protest, that's when it gets really dangerous, and that's how bad the Iranian economy was. I'm not saying sanctions will work. I'm saying we don't know. So, because me and Joe have been advocating for Trump to just walk away for a while, I still think it's the best option. But I'm saying there's a high possibility that maybe it's not, because that is still just walking away after all the mess that's created is really freaking bad for the US. You just walk away with the who's going to stop Iran from charging whatever it wants at the Strait of Hormuz? So you understand who's going to stick up for the allies of the region, American allies that have depended on the US for decades.
Look,
You can't. The American strategy, what made the US the empire it is the alliance networks it has built around the world. And it's already destroyed its reputation in the eyes of all these allies. That's why they're looking at alternatives, like we saw with the Mecca agreement. But if you just walk away, and again, that's something I advocate for, but I don't want to. I advocate for it, but I also don't want to dismiss how catastrophic it will be for the US. You've just walked away on allies that depend on the US. The American bases are still here. These allies still depend on the American economy. Everyone is terrified of American sanctions. That's still the case. Anyone that gets sanctioned, their life is destroyed. A company that gets sanctioned economically gets hit massively. So,
but there are alternatives now, though. I mean, the Chinese, alternatives. Yeah, but they're going to get stronger, unfortunately, because I argue the empire is weak and dying anyway. So why hang on to a dead corpse? Why ride that corpse to the end of the
because that dead corpse is still the empire. It's dying, but it's still the empire right now. It is dying. It's not dead. It could take 20, 30, 40 years for it to die. A country sanction anybody right now. I know a lot of people, a lot of companies are begging for these sanctions to be removed. Getting sanctioned by the United States is still one of the most damaging things to a company or economy.
It turns out it's also not conducive for the U.S. either, because it didn't destroy the Iranians, didn't destroy Russia.
Yeah, it didn't.
I can't really think of a single...
In Russia's case, I think it actually made it stronger, because the way an economy grow is by investment. Investments in new factories, investment in new shops, investment in new buildings, apartment buildings. And for that, you need money be reinvested. Before the sanctions, a lot of money in Russia, the wealthy business owners that made that money, they just invested into the West. So it just left Russia, weakening the ruble and propping up like the tech bubble in the United States. But because of the sanctions, now money made in Russia is staying in Russia and being reinvested in Russia. And that's causing their economy to blossom, to boom. So the sanctions have had the reverse effect on Russia.
Recent example where U.S. sanctions actually worked.
No, hold on, Brandon. You can't say it didn't destroy the U.S., the Iran. I'm not okay. You use the word destroy. I don't think anyone expected Iran to just capitulate as a country. A lot of countries survive with sanctions.
Washington absolutely believed this. Yeah, they absolutely believed this.
Some people did, but the Iranian economy is you understand how big Iran would be? It would be a global superpower right now if Iran didn't have sanctions. So one could say Iran's being destroyed relative to what it could be if there were no sanctions. The sanctions.
I think there's some issues here.
The sanctions are the reasons for the Iranian people suffering. The sanctions are the reason for the protests.
I think the issue here is you could make the same argument. Oh, the Soviet Union. If we didn't, I think there's some internal problems within that are embedded within the regime. That if we just backed off and we didn't meddle, I think that regime would either be forced to fundamentally reform or would collapse on its own. The way that the Soviet Union
would be more powerful. No, would be more powerful.
No,
I've heard this argument from many people that, if nothing had happened, if we hadn't bombed them last year or this year, internal pressure, there would have been reform. They might have changed their form of government, lessened the role of the supreme leader. But that will never happen during an active war.
How do you know that wouldn't?
Because I think that there are some inherent there are structural weaknesses within the regime that go ignored when they are constantly being pressured from outside forces. And I think that if we would just back off and let the things happen as they might, I think you might see some real reforms there over time. I don't think under current conditions.
Yeah, but I think their economy could have been, or you could have had a country, or Iran would, if without sanctions right now, there's also a possibility the IRGC would remain in power and Iran would be a global power.
That's happening no matter what. Both of these things.
I'm saying it could be the case. I'm saying it would have been the case 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
No, I don't know. That's fine. I don't agree. I don't necessarily agree with that. But my point is,
I've never seen sanctions work. Never. Like Iran sanctioned forever, North Korea sanctioned forever, Russia sanctioned forever. Has sanctions ever led to like a regime change or a good outcome from Washington? No, sanctions are just a way to weaken a country Washington doesn't like and to make their people suffer, in the hopes that, if we make their people suffer enough, there might be a regime change, but that never works.
Is that it's happening now, even with all of the things that we've brought to bear. And frankly, the United States can't sustain this. We cannot sustain the empire.
Yeah, sanctions do give U.S. leverage in negotiations. I agree with you there, Gata.
We've got it. We need to get the hell out. And it's going to be ugly and it's going to be embarrassing in the short term. But I remind audiences, it was awful how we got out of Afghanistan, but it was also good that we got out of Afghanistan because we're not bogged down there. It's not our problem. And the American empire didn't collapse. The United States is actually probably stronger because it's not bogged down in Afghanistan another 25 years. So I think actually getting out of the Middle East, telling the locals, figure it out. It's your problem. I think this is the best thing that could happen. Don't threaten me with a good time is what I say. I don't care. Let them figure out the Strait of Hormuz. Let Iran figure out how they're going to charge this. Let Oman deal with it. Get us out. We have an entire hemisphere of the world. There is a bounty of natural resources here. We don't develop it because we're too enmeshed over there. This is the perfect excuse to start building out here. for the next decade. That's what I want. And we're not going to get that if we keep getting sucked into the Middle East. So get out is what I say.
I think also getting out is a process. You don't get out instantly right now. Bases are out by next year. The US is out. American interests are out. You don't do it that.
Never. At this rate. At this rate.
Yeah, and look at how Afghanistan turned out. When you probably not the best example, but what I mean is when an empire falls, you got to do it gradually, systematically, and not abruptly. Otherwise, it could be very violent. And when an empire falls, the US empire has been falling for decades. I think it will fall, and it could be faster than many people anticipate, or it could be slower. The US could remain the hegemon 50 years. I think so too. But all I'm saying is that there is also a possibility we can't dismiss and be so absolute about it, that it could be a possibility in 50 years' time, your country is still the world empire.
Speaking of Afghanistan and the cost of the loss of U.S. hegemony, de-dollarization in Afghanistan involves the strict Taliban mandates forcing local commercial and daily transactions to use the national currency, the Afghani, instead of U.S. dollar or neighboring currencies like Pakistani rupee. Because while we were there after the war, the country was essentially dollarized. They just used the dollar as their currency. But since we were forced out of Afghanistan, Taliban take over, and they say, why do we have dollars as a currency? That makes no sense. And they put in their own currency. They come up with the Afghani, and they start mandating everyone use that. And the dollars in Afghanistan, they leave it for other countries, and some of it comes back to the United States. Yep. Well, these dollars, that's inflation. When these dollars make their way back to the United States from Afghanistan, that's pent-up inflation. We print the money via drug trafficking. It left the country, ended up in Afghanistan, and that lowered inflation in the United States when that happened, when it left the country, these dollars. When these dollars come back, because Afghanistan de-dollarizes, that creates inflation everywhere that uses a dollar, including the United States. And that's why U.S. hegemony and the reason is important. Afghanistan isn't the only country that uses the dollar as its secondary currency or primary currency. As U.S. influence over the region wanes, other countries will de-dollarize, and that's going to create inflation back here in the United States.
That is still very possible. There's a lot of cracks in the Chinese economy.
There's no doubt.
Talk about yuan replacing the US dollar. A lot of other people I speak to, they say, Mario, this is impossible. People don't trust the yuan first. The US dollar has the network effect. And it's impossible. So I had George Gammon talk to me about this. He's like, Mario, I went to Argentina years ago when the currency was collapsing. He's like, Mario, I went there, I had gold, silver, and Bitcoin. I was unable to sell my gold and silver and Bitcoin for the Argentinian currency, the peso.
I think it's the peso.
The peso. I couldn't sell these assets for the peso, which was tumbling on a daily basis, losing value because of the network effect. Everyone trusted the peso. He couldn't get. Whenever he was able to sell his gold, he sold it at a 50% haircut. So the point he was making, there is a network effect, and the network effect of the US dollar has been established over decades.
That's changing. Bitcoin and gold is becoming more established as an alternative currency. And I bet you today it'd be easier to sell gold or Bitcoin in Argentina.
Alternatives are coming up. You can only look at the reality right now. The US as a percentage of global reserve currency, the US dollar is still by far the majority. I can't remember what the exact number is. Maybe about 80% plus or minus. The US dollar is still the euro dollar is still massive. Trade is still mostly conducted in the US.
Yeah, the problem with that, Mario, is when the US stops being reserve currency, it just needs to shrink a tiny bit. If it shrinks a tiny bit of outflows from the United States, that creates a spiral that ends in destruction of the dollar. It means treasury yields start rising. It means the borrowing costs of the United States government goes out of control. That undermines confidence further. More people bail out of treasuries. Interest rates go out further. Now the cost of financing itself is impossible for the U.S. government. Everyone knows it. Starts being panic. Dollar crashes more. It becomes a spiral. So just the start. It's like the dollar's at the top of a hill that leads to destruction. And if it starts rolling, there's nothing that can stop it.
US dollars, the SWIFT system is by far the biggest, I think 97%, 98%. So reality is reality. I think the weaknesses are things that we will see the effect of later on. For example, the shipyards. That's a perfect example where
well, we all need a little doom and gloom in our life, Gata Narendra. I see it happening. I just can't be optimistic about it when I see it happening.
Below the surface that people don't notice, and I was going to tell you earlier.
Besides, what I'm talking about, the U.S. debt being completely out of control, even mainstream economics acknowledge that we're on the verge of a debt spiral. The debt GDP is way too much. In one recession because in recession, government usually borrows even more to spend its way out of the recession, and GDP plunges. So plunging GDP plus skyrocketing debt isn't where the United States is where it is now is not a good combination.
I'm surprised the media is not up in arms about this issue. But this is something when later on the US ships are underperforming during wartime, or the US not able to build enough ships to catch up to China. We go back to
That's already happened.
Brandon, yeah, it's already happening when it happens at a bigger scale. Brandon and others were talking about this 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yep.
I think this is what we're going to be seeing. Another example right now I saw as we were going on just before we started, there was a story by the Wall Street Journal. That's a big one. Again,
Which one?
I'll read it now.
Yeah.
Ukrainian drone units. So they were wargaming. The Ukrainians and Americans were wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
I think Europeans as well. Ukrainian drone units decisively defeated a U.S. armored brigade.
Yeah.
During the combined resolve military exercise in Germany earlier this year, highlighting shortcomings in the U.S. military's adaptation to modern drone warfare. Operators from Ukraine's 412th Nemesis Regiment quickly located American armored vehicles, which were particularly visible because of the dust they generated, before using simulated explosive dropping and FPV drone attacks to destroy them. The Ukrainian teams eliminated U.S. vehicles so rapidly that American units had to repeatedly respawn to keep the exercise running.
Yeah.
U.S. military hasn't adapted to the era of drone warfare yet. That's why, if Trump ever did send troops in on the ground, it would be an unmitigated disaster. Unmitigated. There we go. Disaster.
Yes, I heard about this. I think this was back in February is when and this is the second time I think this has happened in a NATO exercise in the last few years, where Ukrainian teams have just completely routed a NATO. I think one of the other exercises, it was against, I think, Belgium or Finnish troops. They did the same thing. This is a repeated pattern. And in fact, we saw
Russia is going to come out of this Ukraine conflict a monster militarily. You have most experienced veteran military in the world that has experience with current modern-day drone warfare. Ukraine, yes, to the extent that they have people surviving this war, have a pretty strong. Will have some veterans, but their military will be shrunk severely. While Russia's military is at the levels it was, they replaces their losses. They're not having a manpower shortage, so once it's over, war with the war against Russia that Europe is sinking is not a good idea.
During the Iran war, at the height of the war, you had Ukrainians being brought in with drones to help defend Israel, and one of the Ukrainian commanders commented that the Americans have no idea what they're gaining drones. They have no idea. They have no idea how to counter them. They have no idea this is. We've been fighting Russia for so many years, and the Americans have not figured it out yet, even though they've been helping us. So this is a problem. But I mean, it's just another example, though. The empire is not doing well. The empire is on its last legs, and we're not even supposed to be an empire, by the way. But this is. I don't think this is lending anything to the other side saying that we can keep this going. And I talked to who did I talk to today? Well, yesterday we talked to Zuccaro, Ray Zuccaro, and he's an emerging markets guy in Latin America. And he was saying the same thing that I was hearing from the last guy I talked to. He's saying the same thing that I heard from Peter Alexander in Shanghai, which is that basically the transition's already underway. And, the Americans who aren't seeing it, they're going to miss the boat. And the shift is happening. Now, Peter Alexander did say something about the shift, and it has to do with China's economy, which is something you just said. He said the Chinese economy right now is soft. And he said, and that's because they're transitioning, or they're trying to do a managed transition from real estate and infrastructure to high-end manufacturing and infrastructure. Now, he said they've already made the first necessary move toward advanced robotics. That's part of that advanced manufacturing shift. And he said that his quote to me at the end of the show yesterday was, in the next 10 years, if China can make that pivot where they are truly dominant in advanced manufacturing practices, he said the Americans already are so far behind, because at that point it is all over, that the United States has decisively lost.
Brennan,
I see no way for the United States to catch up. It took us over 20 years to outsource our manufacturing to China. There's no way we can rebuild it in just a couple of years now.
3 days ago, Chinese humanoid robot manufacturers accounted for more than 97% of global shipments during the first half of 2026, according to Bloomberg.
Yeah. So this is exactly why. I mean, and then you pair that.
97%,
Yeah.
Brennan.
Yeah. Yep. This is what Peter Alexander was saying.
I don't understand that statistics. 90 of shipments of what? Were they the ones making the ship? Because I guarantee you, there's a lot of commodities still moving the worlds, and those are shipments too.
And you pair that with the fact that there's this bond issue. That you pair that with the fact that the U.S. economy is hobbled. You pair that with the fact that we've got really not strong showing in the military domain, and the fact that China has all the gold, this gold reserve. I just think that at this point we've locked ourselves in.
The Arctic as well. The Arctic emergency management, the shipping corridor between Europe and Asia, and the US cannot manufacture the icebreakers to be able to win the race there.
Which gets us back to the shipyard.
Yeah, I think Russia has like 40 icebreakers. The United States has 1. It's not a question. Just look at the world map as to who is a superpower in the Arctic. Russia. All of this is Russia. Russia controls the Arctic. I mean, there's Canada, there's Alaska. This belongs to no one. So, in terms of region bordering the Arctic, we're not going to be winning the fight for the Arctic. The Arctic belongs to Russia.
Crisis as well, because they can't produce this stuff. And the Russians in 2008, in their national security strategy memo, when we were all talking about Iraq and Ukraine and what's going to happen in Europe, the Russians identified the Arctic as their #1 strategic priority. And if you go back to that national security strategy memo that the Russian National Security Agent or National Security Council put out, they outlined a 10-year plan on how they were going to dominate the Arctic. And you know what? They achieved that goal. While everybody was focused on the Middle East and Ukraine and all that, the Russians have completely conquered, for now, the Arctic. And to be fair, they do have a lot of coastline with the Arctic. So
well, that's why what I was saying, you can't break Russia's control over the Arctic when it has coastline like this. They have 80% of the coastline, Arctic coastline. This is the sea of the Arctic. Especially when the United States is distracted by Iran and other stuff.
Automatically are going to have more influence there. But they have completely outstripped the Americans and Canadians. And now, by the way, as an aside, this Canadian-U.S. spat has complicated the ability for Canada to get the F-35. Now, I'm a critic of the F-35. I don't love the F-35, but it is our primary export to Canada right now. And the reason we need them to get those 88 warplanes is because they're not doing enough patrolling of the high north. And NORAD absolutely requires Canada's assistance in conducting those patrols, in securing that high north region. Canada can't do it even if they wanted to, because their Air Force is antiquated and they've been needing the F-35. And now because of the trade war, Carney is saying, I don't think we want the F-35. We don't want to be dependent on the United States.
And the US needs the icebreakers from Canada as well.
Well, the icebreakers, I think they're talking about Finland right now, but those
Finland
are not...
and Canada. Canada and Finland, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think they're both. But in either case, they're not nuclear, is my understanding. So Russia has, I think, like a handful of... They have the world's largest fleet of nuclear icebreakers. This is a big deal, and nobody's talking about it other than there is somebody who is. Elizabeth Buchanan is a friend of mine. She's with the Australians. She's in Australia, but she's the expert on polar and Arctic security, and she's the expert, and she's a good friend of mine. We should probably have her on the show at some point because she's solid. But I will say we have ceded the Arctic. By the way, you want to talk about what another unspoken thing, unknown thing, China dominating the Antarctic. They are creating a web that goes from the Southern Ocean across the Antarctic, all the way up through Argentina. So this is another thing that the polar regions we've ignored. And why is that important?
What does that mean, a web? Damn, I might have to look into that.
Well, because of satellites, right? The poles are very important, the north and south, for satellite management, for polar orbit, satellites on polar orbit. I mean, this is...
Another reason the Antarctic's important is it's an entire continent. Like the North Pole, that's just ice up here. There's Greenland, there might be valuable resources there, but here that there is some oil, but otherwise it's just water. The Arctic, though, this is an entire continent with undoubtedly lots of rich materials underneath the ice there. Today we don't need it, but in the future we might need the minerals, the metals, the rare earths buried in Antarctica. Of course, it is a pretty damn cold place and inhospitable, but one day humanity will go develop it.
the Chinese figured this out. So they have been dominating this for about 10 years. Okay. And we haven't even taken the field. And now, because of the Russians with their nuclear icebreakers, they've got the Northern Sea route. Our alternative is the Northwest Passage. It needs to be dredged. And there's a huge, since the 70s, territorial spat with Canada where.
I'm sure one reason that Russia, specifically in the last 10 years, developed this Arctic region is to diversify away from Europe. So that oil can be shipped around to China this way, bypassing Europe entirely. I'm sure that's very attractive towards Russia with how hostile Europe is.
Canada's saying, no, America, this is ours. You can't use it. But Canada doesn't want to develop it because of the environment. So now the Russians have built out the alternative to the Suez Canal on their side of the Arctic. We have nothing comparable. And now they're letting the Chinese use it. And the Chinese are saying, oh, guess what? We're a near Arctic power, whatever the hell that means. But it doesn't matter because what matters is can you use that as a leverage point? And the Chinese are.
Which goes back to the original point that started this about the IRGC prolonging this war. There's a lot of other.
Because during the winter, North Pole during the winter, let me get a picture of that. North Pole during winter. Satellite. See, during the winter, the ice, it spreads. Normally it's hard for shipping to go here during the winter months, but with icebreakers, they can create a passage like the Suez Canal, I was saying, so shipments can go around this side of the world even during the winter. Here's another one. It just becomes all frozen up there. But icebreakers could break through that, and they create their own Suez Canal to get shipments over to Asia.
There are interests, a lot of other countries that have interest in this war, China, Russia being two of them. And they could be, convincing the Iranians, maybe incentivizing the Iranians to continue this, to continue weakening the Americans. Because while the US is trying to get itself or solve the mess it created in West Asia, the Chinese, the Russians, mainly the Chinese, are focusing on all these other areas that are not even being discussed by the US right now. The shipyard crisis is not going to be resolved when the US is trying to figure out how to open the Strait of Hormuz. I think those distractions could be China's way of.
Meanwhile, China has the most. Their shipyards are outpacing. I mean, they basically build most of the world's ships now, and they have the second largest navy. And their submarine force, by the way, has just surpassed the size of the Russian submarine force for the first time in history, which means now the U.S. submarine force is only larger, but ours isn't growing at a rate that the Chinese is growing. And every generation of Chinese nuclear submarines are now getting more advanced than the last. So we have a big problem here. Quantity, it's not just quantity anymore. The Chinese are getting quality too with every iteration.
On that front as well, in terms of going back to war, we've talked about the Bloomberg.
And it's not just quantity now of military that in Navy, in terms of Navy, of U.S. Navy and Chinese Navy, there is wartime mobilization. United States mobilized during World War II. We built 7,000 ships to fight World War II. That's something China can do now. If it mobilized its industry to a wartime footing and focused on building ships, it could outproduce the United States by a factor of 100 or more in terms of making ships. And so it's not, you can't just look at the current level of ships, which still marginally favors the United States, in terms of the ability to just pump out warships and missiles and everything the United States can't build. China has us beat.
Report of Iran adopting more aggressive strategy. You have the U.S. State Department asking embassies across the Middle East to prepare plans for operating with significantly reduced staff because they expect, that kind of status quo, that limbo to remain with Iran, which, kinetic action could break out anytime. And then.
Okay, I'm actually going to end this here because I don't really care about embassies. Other than that, it was a great video. The status quo will continue until the oil shortage begins. And yeah, the wait-and-see approach will favor Iran. Definitely. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you next video. Bye.